Give everybody a couple minutes. Very good. Got it. Give everybody a little bit of time to gather up. Nora Gray from Great Falls, good to see you. Hope Randy is in the house there somewhere, not trapped under something heavy. We got Marion Bing from Pittsburgh. You know, Bing, this is an Allegheny story at its core. So go Gators.
Yes, and we know exactly where she lived.
I actually made a visit to the park.
Excellent. All right. Well, we're going to have to delve into that as we move on. Carlin Candy, great to see you. MJ, glad you've been able to be in the park. Being Nancy Russell, MJ has a great one-person interpretive show that she does as Nancy Russell, and has been able to be in the park with that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Gary Shea, always great to see you. It's really terrific to have so many friends from around the country. I missed you all last month. Thank you all for joining in on Backpackers Ball. We intentionally left July open in book club so that we could all gather in what really was a historic event for us. We broke all records in terms of our auction income that night. So thank you for your support, but it's neat to be back at it in book club. This month we have a unique opportunity because I chose this book because I fell in love with it the minute I read it. My background is actually the cover of the original 1916 publication of this book, hardcover, that I own, and that actually Julie's family has owned for a number of years, which is where I really fell in love with this book. And of course, being that Mary Roberts Rinehart is no longer with us, the Agatha Christie of American mystery writing at the time, I read the foreword and saw that her great-grandson, Rick Rinehart, is carrying on part of the family tradition of being a great writer and a publisher. And so I reached out to Rick, who was super generous, to offer to be with us tonight as he has carried forward this legacy and tradition and has his own Glacier Park story of current visits to Glacier National Park. So Rick, thank you for taking time out of your late evening in Essex, Connecticut to be with us.
My pleasure.
So as we got to know each other a little bit over email, we talked a little bit about the fact that your great-grandmother was a part of your life, but not for very long, but clearly had a large impact on you. Talk to us a little bit about the Rinehart family and your great-grandmother and kind of that origin story, if you would.
Sure. Yeah, I was 5 when she died, so I can't say that I knew her very well personally, but stories came down through the family over the years, and I actually have one uncle who's still alive, her last grandson. And so, we talk about her a lot, and it's her influence over our family has been rather extraordinary. She was really, as many other people have said, a tycoon. And she has a great Horatio Alger story in her past. She literally came up from the street in Pittsburgh and found her fortune by writing, which is very rare, I have to say, as both a writer and a publisher. No one ever makes a lot of money doing that. And she became the best-selling American author up until about 1960. She sold more books than anybody else, more than Hemingway, more than Fitzgerald. Her volume was incredible. Plus, she created this huge following, especially among American women, throughout the early 20th century. And she really, as I say in the foreword to both Through Glacier Park and Tenting Tonight, she made us, her descendants, all possible. We would never be living the lives we do now without her. And so she's always had this huge penumbra over her descendants. And it's in some cases for people like my father and other of his cousins, it's been hard to escape it quite frankly. It's just, she is so dominant in this. And there are so few things that she really wanted to be permitted about her life that only nowadays, in going through archives and really doing a lot of research, we're discovering some other things that she did that she would wanted to keep more or less quiet. And one of them was she created the great publishing company, the Rinehart Company, which became Holt, Rinehart, and Winston. She was very much behind the scenes. She did not want to overshadow her children, who were the founders of that company. But when I go through all the correspondence, I see that she was basically the boss. So she ranks up there in that respect with people like Alfred Knopf, or the people who founded Random House, or Doubleday, or things, or people like that. She was right up there, but she did not want to be out front with it. She also walked the walk and didn't talk the talk as far as feminism goes. She'd rather lead by example. I think she was in one suffragette rally in her entire life, but the rest of the time, she did her work by example. So it was no surprise when Howard Eaton asked her to go with him through Glacier National Park, the newly minted Glacier National Park, in 1915. She was already one of the boys. And Howard Eaton descended on her at a very vulnerable time because she had just returned from the front in World War I and was really shaken by what she had seen. I urge you all, if you haven't read it, to read her memoir of her time on the front called Kings, Queens, and Pawns. It's a really gritty tale of someone who is actually the first war correspondent, period, of any sex, any nationality on the Belgian front in World War I. And she was truly shaken by it. So when Howard Eaton descended upon her in the spring of 1915 or whenever it was, and said, let's go explore Glacier National Park, this was a healing thing for her after what she'd been through. Because not only did she come back from that experience, she had to write about it for, I think it was Ladies' Home Journal, but I could be wrong. And then she published a book about the whole experience too. So she was traumatized and she needed something to heal her. And you can see in her writing and Through Glacier National Park how she writes about the experience. And it really is for her, it really was for her a total healing experience. In fact, she, as I write in the foreword to Through Glacier Park, she literally changed from this matronly Victorian era woman into a Westerner. And it transformed her life entirely.
Really a remarkable story. When you compare her with Knopf and some of the others, that's one thing if we put gender aside. But to think about a woman in America in the 19 teens and 20s being a dominant voice in business really was something at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. And she didn't want it, known in a way. There are a lot of stories about when my grandfather published Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead. She was appalled at the language in it, in the original manuscript, and insisted that certain words be changed as a result. And so you get, if I may be so colorful, you get the word F-U-G instead of F-U-C-K throughout the manuscript. And that was her doing. That was her intervening as basically the chairman of the board saying, no, we're not going to do this. Yeah,
that's super interesting. And when you talk about the West having changed her as a person, that you see that in the book, right? When she talks about this hard scrabble journey, and you can almost see in the writing how much she starts to really attach herself to the passion of it in a way. That is really significant. And maybe that discovery of that independence and courage and quiet strength, do you think she took that back east with her and that helped kind of shape who she was?
I really don't know. I think what happened, what it really was, Doug, was she was falling in love with the West. And that's what that book is really all about. And then she, of course, after that, she started going to Howard Eaton's ranch in Wolf, Wyoming, which we did for 5 generations. I mean, I went in 1963 for the first time. And that became the family ranch, as it were, because of her. But it was, there were 2 sides to her. I mean, complicated people have many different sides. Let's put it that way. And the West was definitely a completely different personality for her.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Well, Doug Mitchell here. For those of you, we now have our group kind of gathered and settled. Thank you again all for being here. Good to see Ed Wilson again and Janet Brandt. I know you're on the road. Thanks for joining us from the road. I'm joined tonight by my colleagues, Jill Bridgman, who will be helping with the chat. Please feel free right away to launch questions in the chat. Of course, you can always unmute yourself and just ask questions that way. And Sean O'Leary, Sean is going to be taking roll tonight. We're going to be giving away a couple of copies of Tenting tonight. So Sean will be helping us out with that as we move on. Rick is also an accomplished writer in his own right and publisher. Kind of tell us a little bit, Rick, if you would, about your own career and how you came to that on your own.
Oh, well, goodness. I'll keep it brief because it's not that interesting. I originally got into publishing in 1977 by working for a small university press in Colorado. And it just so happens that the director of the press had a house in Wilson, Wyoming. And he was very connected with Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone National Park because he used to sell stuff to them. And so he got me involved in publishing books for Yellowstone and Grand Teton. And that became my career for, I want to say 30 years, was working with the national parks on publishing books, telling their story, that sort of thing. Since then, I've really branched out into many other fields, which I won't go into, but basically that's how it all started. And that was my real love in the beginning. And that was like Mary Roberts Rinehart. That was 1977. I'd first moved to Colorado. That was when I fell in love with it too. And I really got into it. It became a very good business for us. And I loved working with park people because they buy books on their merits and not because they're going to sell. So it's been a unique experience. And every year I still attend what is called the Public Lands Alliance meeting, but it used to be the National Park Cooperating Associations and many other iterations of the organizations that actually sell books within the national parks that are 501c3s and kick back money into the parks themselves. So I've been doing this for, good God, 44 years, something like that. So that's really how I got started. But since then, of course, I've done a lot of different things and really branched out. But that was how I got started. Well,
and you published a book that is a memoir of sorts, I guess, about your time as a rowing champion.
Yeah, I did. It was a story that needed to be told. It's kind of an extraordinary story, and I was very lucky to have the whole thing happen to me. So I just, Ernest Hemingway used to say, find a good story and write about it. And I had one, so I wrote about it.
Yeah, so that, and we'll put the book title, Men of Kent, for those who are curious. We have voracious readers in this crowd, Rick, so don't be surprised. And tell us, that's your own personal experience of being involved in a kind of an epic rowing adventure.
Yeah, and it's also it's more than that. I mean, it's not just a rowing book. It's about my family and about my relationship with my father and things like that, but not too touchy-feely. But it's basically, I think the quote that I have from Albert Einstein says it all. Some people believe nothing is a miracle, and some people believe everything is a miracle.
Yeah, there you
What a
go.
miracle.
There you go. Well, it's interesting. I was doing a little bit of research as I was preparing for tonight. I'm always, as you guys know, a little starstruck when I have the opportunity to meet with people like Rick, and I have to be prepared. I have to make sure I calm nerves. I didn't feel any better when I went to Amazon, Rick, and they told me that people who buy books by you also buy books by David Halberstam, Eric Larson, and Homer. So you're in very good company, it seems, in that regard.
Well, don't believe everything you read.
Yeah, there you go. So I'm going to pick on my friends Mary and Bing because I love them dearly, and I only wish I were sitting in your living room with you there in Pittsburgh. But Mary, you touched on visiting the park, and also I think what Rick said resonates with a lot of us here, which is the story of being in Glacier, being in the West, and falling in love with the West. And I know for you guys, it was not only falling in love with the West, but it was also falling in love with each other. Okay, we're going to unmute you though, Mary, because your voice is much nicer. I'm glad Mary's doing this and not Bing, because it actually has a chance of working.
There we go. Let's try that. We both had our summer after our freshman year in college. I was coming from Houston, Texas, where I had spent my freshman year at Rice. And Bing was coming from Pennsylvania, where he had spent his freshman year at Allegheny College.
Go Gators.
And we met because we were both at Glacier Park Lodge. And that's where they fed the trail crew, and that's where the rest of the employees got our subsistence wages and food. And we fed our sense of adventure, and it has continued through a lifetime.
Well, and we're looking forward to seeing you get back. And if others have kind of that story, it's a great time for us to share with each other kind of that Western discovery story. I'll kind of tell you mine. Mine is not dissimilar. My wife, Julie grew up here in the Flathead. As I like to say, she's been hiking here for 56 or 7 years. We're both 60. And we were in college together. She brought me up here and we hiked the Highline Trail. I'll never forget it. And it was the moment when we decided this was our path, and we really have been here for the most part ever since. So feel free to share stories. Put them. You want to raise your hand, put them in the post as well. But I think that is one of the great things about Through Glacier Park, Rick, is that it is the opportunity for your great-grandmother to tell her story, but for all of us who take the same journey today, we get to see those trails in the same way. Do you think if your great-grandmother were with us today, what would she think of the Glacier Park, of the national park system as we now know it?
Boy, I think it's difficult to make that exercise, that intellectual exercise, because look at what she had when she did her trip. There were 40 people, God knows how many horses and mules. And you can't falter nowadays for having that kind of security. I mean, she should be, today she would be light hiking that trail and doing it in a couple of days. But back then, keep in mind that this was a new park and the West was vastly unexplored. And they didn't have the conveniences that we had nowadays. I don't know if that answers the question, but I have trouble transposing what happened in 1915 onto 2021.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, it's hard. In one way, I guess I would think that she would be gobsmacked by the fact that the same trails she was on, when she describes hiking to Sperry, it would be exactly the same today, including basically the look of the chalet as when she saw it.
Yeah.
At the same time, she would most certainly not be alone.
Well, that's the thing. She would probably say, where the hell did all these people come from?
Yeah, exactly. So I mentioned earlier that Mary Jane Bradbury spent some time in the park and around Montana and the region in a Nancy Russell, portraying Nancy Russell super authentically, by the way. And thank you for doing that, Mary Jane. Charlie Russell was one of the companions of your great-grandmother as she took this journey. There were really a lot of dignitaries that came with or that she ran into in this trip.
Yeah, Charlie Russell had a romantic interest in her too. And I came across a letter, I want to say 30 years ago, that he wrote either to her or about her, and he was totally smitten. And we have lost that letter since then. So it's lost to history, let's put it that way. But it was very interesting.
Russell cuts quite a large swath here in Montana and in Glacier Park, where, as you know, he and Nancy constructed the Bullhead Lodge on the south end of Lake McDonald, which still stands today. So next time you come, Rick, you'll have to have to come and take a look at that. No doubt. Yeah. So Jill, I know we've already got some questions. People are tired of hearing me talk. So I'll pass it on to you for some questions.
Yeah, let's dive in. Thanks everyone for putting in some questions so far. We have a really good one to kick it off from my very own mother-in-law, Gina. She commented, Mary did so much. And her question is, did she have stories about encountering limitations and discrimination because she was a woman? Are you familiar with any stories like that, Rick?
No. I'm saying that emphatically. She was a man's man. Let's put it that way. She was best friends with Theodore Roosevelt, who was a progressive. She could walk into the White House anytime she wanted to and sit down with President Harding, for example, or President Hoover. Not very fond of the Democrats, I would have to say. But when the whole incident with the Blackfeet Indians arose after her visit in 1915, she walked right into Secretary Lane's office and said, you got to do something about this right now. And he did. So she was that kind of person. She felt very comfortable in what you back then would call a man's world.
Sure. That's awesome. Do you know, did she journal during her glacier trip, or did she have a typewriter with her? Do you know her process?
I don't know what she did. She never used a typewriter. Everything was handwritten on a legal pad.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was never comfortable with the typewriter at all. So you have to assume that she just took notes while she was in the saddle or in the campground.
Yeah, cool. Will is wondering, has anyone ever replicated the journey that Mary and Eaton undertook? Yeah,
somebody did it. I'm surprised you don't know about this. I don't have the name, but somebody did it a few years ago.
Okay.
Apparently published a book about it. You might check with some of the other publishers like Riverbend up there just to see, because I swear that I saw something about that. But
yeah, if anybody knows, shout that out or put in the chat. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's see, there's a couple similar questions about kind of revolving around the archives. Scott was wondering, is there any sort of archive or collection of her personal papers or business papers or correspondence, things like that?
Yeah, University of Pittsburgh Special Collections. They've got a huge archive of her stuff. I've been through it pretty extensively and pulled the things that I've got another beneath my desk right here. In fact, there's a whole file drawer full of her stuff. I've got all her original book publishing contracts because, of course, I have to research copyrights when people want to use her material.
Sure, that's cool. And digging a little further into that, Carol is wondering, are there records in the archives of the people who took those horse tours throughout the park in the early years? Have you come across anything like that?
That's a good question. You have to dig through and the archives themselves. When I went through the archives, I wasn't looking for that kind of thing. I was looking for things out of the ordinary, like her association with the publishing business and all her business affairs, stuff like that.
Yeah, cool. Just a few comments. Some people were maybe familiar with her writing or maybe more familiar with her mystery writings. Kathy commented she was familiar with her as a mystery writer and she read The Bat when she was younger, but she had no idea about her other writing. So she's just really excited about this book. And there have been a couple comments like that, people just getting introduced to more of her works apart from.
Yeah, I actually think the best book she ever wrote was her autobiography, My Story. I suggest you all read it. It was published in about 1933 when all the exciting stuff in her life was pretty much over. But I've always been more fond of her nonfiction writing than her fiction writing. I've never been a mystery fan. So that's my prejudice, but.
Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, that's My Story for anyone that wants to get to know and learn a little more about her. Mary Jane is wondering, what do you think, if you have any opinion, of the Jan Kahn bio about Mary?
I think it's probably the best biography that's ever been written about her. But Jan whiffed on a lot of stuff, including my great-grandmother's involvement in the publishing business and some other things that she did. She was more focused on her womanhood. This is in the 1980s, mind you, when thinking was a little bit different about that sort of thing. And she was looking at it from a really hardcore feminist angle, although her research is the most thorough that's ever been done on my great-grandmother.
Cool. That's great. Let's see.
Can I jump in real quick and ask a more specific question about that
Of
biography?
course.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. The biography does focus on her role as a woman and her struggle. And this is why I asked the question. Jan calls her autobiography, My Story, Mary Roberts Rinehart's best work of fiction, because she feels like Mary created a myth about herself, sort of that her writing career was in response to necessity, that she really truly wanted the story of her life to be, the myth that she created of her life to be about her family, her role with the family, and that she struggled, that she didn't spend more time with her family. So there is that perspective in the Cohn biography that talks about when she was much later in her life, in her 80s. She wrote that My Story in her 50s. And in her 80s, she wrote more reflective notes that weren't published. And those Jan was able to get a hold of. And she said in those, she was a little more authentic and a little more transparent about what it really was like to be a woman at the turn of the 20th century. That's when women were just taking all kinds of new risks and had other choices. And like you said, Mary had so many sides to her. She was a remarkably powerful woman. She could walk into the White House and she could sit down with names that you and I just marvel at. And on the other side, she'd been raised as a Victorian woman, and her role was wife and mother. And that is how she sort of struggled all of her life with that. I'm this and I'm that, and I'm this and I'm that. So that's why I wondered what you.
That's absolutely correct. I think you're reading it right, because she struggled whether what she was doing was a profession or a career. Tell me what the difference is. And I think she was really splitting hairs on that, because she wanted her public persona to be that she was a wife and mother and writing was her profession, but it was not her career. So what's a career? It's something you're dedicated, you're sort of redirecting your life towards, away from something else like your family. But she became such an institution that that was impossible. So she kept fighting that. And I think that came out in my story. The unpublished autobiographical fragment to which you refer, I have a copy of it. It's really revealing. I mean, not to get too fine into it, but she basically said that Dr. Rinehart, her husband, broke her out of the whole Victorian sexuality stuff. And she said, he was basically saying, we had a good time. And, you know, he really showed me that life did not have to be in Victorian trappings, that kind of thing. And she would say stuff like that. It was very honest. So it was kind of a remarkable thing. And it did contradict a lot of what she claimed in my story.
Well, that, I think she epitomizes the new woman. That was a thing at the turn of the 20th century, a person who was raised one way and had the opportunity to live differently. And I don't even think today, I look at the women in some of these, you know, age groups that we have represented, and I think women still, in the 60s, we were raised, 50s, we were raised one way, and then things really change. So there's always that evolving way that women have a chance to show up, and we're still in the midst of all of our evolving gender roles these days. But thank you. I appreciate this perspective. Thank you.
Oh, no, absolutely. We all see it. I think she got away with so much because she was the matriarch. You
know. That's great. Yeah.
Well, and I just want to share one story. This is the Rinehart story that I love. And I think it speaks to the struggle that she had. So when she went on the trip in Glacier Park, 1915, the women were riding astride, you know, one leg on each side of the horse. And there was a split riding skirt that had two legs. And then there was a panel that flipped over the front of that skirt that buttoned down both sides. So when you're looking at the person and that panel is closed, it looks like a skirt. But when you unbutton the one side, flip it over, then you've got, you know, these two legs that you can get up on a horse and get off. And the story goes that she would ride across miles. They went, you know, so many miles on those horses, and they'd get off for a break or the end of the day, and she'd get in between the horses and she'd flip that panel over and button it up so that when she did present herself out in public, she would have skirts and not the trouser looking thing. And I just think that's such a metaphor for her, two sides of her. I want to be this, but I'm also this. And it's a great story.
That's amazing. Yeah. So Jill, I should be very embarrassed of myself because the two people have, and thank you for doing so, informed us that the book that the writing that you talked about, Rick, is by our dear friend Chris Peterson, who is the publisher of the Hungry Horse News, whose offices are 500 yards from our office.
Okay. Yeah, he contacted me, I guess, 5 years ago, and I sort of lost touch, but that's great.
Yeah, we've had Chris on a couple of Glacier Conversations pieces for us, and we'll bring Chris back at some point. Maybe he'll talk to us about that as well. So Jill, back to you.
Yeah, sounds good. Scott brought up a program that was edited for radio that centered around a story of Mary's about Tish Carberry. And it aired on the Great Northern Railways radio program in 1929. Are you familiar with that? And could you elaborate more on that program?
Not a whole lot. She wrote a series of stories and books about Tish, and who I really don't understand because I don't get into her fiction that much, but it was a very popular series. And Tish was a recurring figure throughout a lot of her books at that time. But like I said, I have to defer on that one. I really don't know a lot about that series.
Yeah, if I can add a comment or two, though, I've been researching that series pretty extensively for quite a few years, and that particular radio broadcast was no fooling on April 1st, 1929. And the title of the program was My Country Tish of Thee.
Oh, I know that one. Yeah, I know that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of a comedy, and these three gals going through Glacier Park, running into bandits and having a big adventure.
Yeah.
But part of my question too for you about this idea of the archives and whatnot, I appreciate knowing about University of Pittsburgh collection. I'm just hoping that maybe if I were to dig into something like that, maybe there'd be some sort of, correspondence maybe between her and officials of the Great Northern, contract regarding the use of her story. In your opinion, is there even a possibility that that sort of thing might be in those kinds of papers?
I would really, one person who would know is Al Runte. Runte's books. He wrote National Park, The American Experience.
I've met Al. Yeah.
Yeah, he's an expert on how the railroads promoted the national parks, and he knows all about Mary Roberts Rinehart's association with the Northern Pacific, and he would be the best one to lead you onto that. I don't recall seeing anything in the University of Pittsburgh archives about that.
It is a one-off kind of thing and kind of obscure, but I thought, as long as I have a chance to chat with you, I'd throw that one out there.
Well, it's important because she was basically a propagandist for the railroads.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, there must be something in there. So I urge you to get in touch with Al, and I've got his contact information if you need it. So
I appreciate it. Yeah, I can reach him, but I guess a related question would be, before we're all done tonight, is there a way that do you have an email that you can share with us, maybe through Doug or something, if we were to contact you?
absolutely. It's R. Rinehart, that's RRINEHART at Rowman.com.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Thanks for the great questions too, Scott. Kate is kind of bringing it back to an earlier question where we were kind of speculating about what Mary would think about the park in today's standards. She quoted a line where Mary says the park needs much more money for roads. Quote, a government mountain reserve without plenty of roads is as valuable as an automobile without gasoline. Do you think her thoughts about that would have changed over time as the park became so popular?
Again, I don't want to impose 1915 values on 2021. I have no idea. I can't speculate what a person like that would think.
Sure.
I mean, all I can tell you is that she was this was really the dawning of national parks, and it was very new, and the West was still very wild. You have to keep that in mind. So the way she viewed it is not the way we view it today. With all the use that national parks get now, and the visitation and the needs of the Park Service and maintaining them is totally different. And so I hesitate to make that kind of comparison.
Mm-hmm. Sure, that's fair. Rick, do you know if Mary has ever been depicted on film, or has that ever been a consideration?
It comes up, I want to say, at least every 5 years.
Okay.
Her popularity comes in waves. And we went through such a wave about a year ago, I want to say. Mysterious Press in New York City has been reissuing a lot of her mysteries and promoting them. Publishers Weekly even did a starred review of one of her books that was published back in 1926, which is unheard of. People are always rediscovering her. And the idea of doing a biopic or something like that, surfaces all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It never goes anywhere, let's put it that way. But it would make a fascinating story because she had such an incredible life. As Jan Cohen wrote, An Improbable Life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I was taken, I know one's never supposed to read a quote on an event like this, but I was really taken by both of these books, obviously. And as we've all spent the last year in various and sundry challenges, one piece of writing in Mary's book, Tenting Tonight, stuck out with me, and I wondered if it might stick out for you as well, or latch on to something that we're all going through. And she writes in the book about her experience in the West and in particularly in Glacier Park and Glacier Country. She writes, quote, "Petty things slip away in the silent high places. It is easy to believe in God here, and the stars in heaven seem very close." And I think it's really interesting to think about writing from 100 and some years ago, that when we go to Glacier Park, like Carl and Candy, I know you were there on Tuesday. And for me to think that this person can write that in 1917 in this case, and that we can feel that in 2021, really says to me something special about not only the writer, which it certainly does, but also about this place or sense of place that we have in these American treasures like Glacier. So thank you for bringing your great-grandmother to life, for me anyway, and for all of us, Rick.
Well, you have to remember what her early life was like. It was miserable. She was poor. She was supposed to go to medical school, but her parents couldn't afford it, and she ended up going to nursing school and working in the worst conditions humanity could possibly offer. So when she went out west to Glacier National Park, it was a complete revelation to her that life could be good.
Yeah, and you hear that. I hear that in that statement that, you know, it's easy to believe in God here. The petty things slip away. I think those are things for all of us that we can latch onto from her writing in our life today, for sure. Sean, I know you've been working on taking attendance. I don't know if you're ready with a name or two of book recipients, or if we need to give you a couple of minutes.
No, I've got them ready. Are you ready for both of them?
I think we should award both books. You betcha.
All right. The first winner is Will Barden.
Congratulations, Will. Book will be on the way.
And winner number 2 is Emma Rifai. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. Rifai.
Emma, congratulations. You, if you've not already read it, because it's hard not to read both of these in series, you'll very much enjoy that. I asked Rick, as we do our authors, if he would be open to doing book plates, and we're going to do that a little bit differently. You may notice, for those of you who are regulars, you may notice that Emily Evans is missing. Emily got a great new job at a Wolf Recovery Center in Washington State. We are going to miss her, but this is a great opportunity for her to spread her wings and make a huge difference in something that really matters to all of us. And so we will miss her, but she was very good at managing the chat and everything all at once. So we're going to ask you to, if you'd like a book plate, please use info@glacier.org. And we'll put that in the chat. Just send a quick email to info@glacier.org about how you would like that inscribed. And Rick and I, Rick has agreed to do that. Thank you, Rick. And Rick also has a special addition to those book plates. Rick, tell us about this stamp that you have.
I happen to have a rubber stamp with my great-grandmother's signature on it. I have no idea how I got it. It was rattling around some detritus from my family. So there it is. If you can see, well, can you see it? Can't tell. It's over there. So I'll stamp that as well on the book plate.
I think that is really cool to be able to have a Mary Roberts Rinehart stamped book plate. So thank you so much for that. So Rick, as you wrote these forwards, you described your great-grandmother as a conservative, and we've talked about how she liked Republicans a little more than she liked Democrats. But how did that, do you think, impact her kind of community leadership in the business sector or the social sector back in that time, where being maybe a social liberal and a fiscal conservative was a bit unique?
I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a mystery to all of us, I think. Because like I said, she was a friend to progressives like Theodore Roosevelt. She really, I mean, based on her experience as a nurse and helping the Blackfeet Indians and things like that, she had a real sensitivity towards people in need. Let's put it that way. I mean, she was not blind to any of that. I think I can't explain it. I really can't at this point. I mean, she was a very successful businesswoman. Obviously, and I'll tell you from a family's point of view, she spent nearly everything that she earned too. She loved the life she lived. She lived somewhat extravagantly for her time. But I don't know. I don't know the rest of it. It's not clear to me, really.
So she was a contemporary then of not only of Roosevelt, then it would have also been George Bird Grinnell. I don't know if you have any, did they have any interaction? Because I know George Bird Grinnell had famous both arguments and agreements with Teddy Roosevelt over the years. Were there any Grinnell, Mary Roberts Rinehart connections?
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't heard of any. She was on, and maybe you guys know more about this than I do, there was a public lands commission formed, I want to say in the 20s, basically to decide what to do with the public lands. And she was on it. I don't know who else was there. I think it's mentioned maybe in my story very briefly. I really don't know what that was all about. She was more of a participant in it. I mean, than an advocate of it, other than doing the bidding of the Northern Pacific Railroad. She just lived it.
Yeah, I mean, that was, when you see the subtitle of the book, See America First, that was the Great Northern Railroad slogan.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I showed this beforehand. I came across this, one of our donors sent it to me. It's the 1913 guide to lodging. The Glacier Park Lodge had just been completed. As it says on the cover, the new $150,000 hotel. And by the way, Nora and Randy, I roomed with Nora and Randy up at Granite Park. The fee, by the way, was $3 a night back then. So we could have afforded that. So Rick Rinehart, before we let you go, as you kind of came to learn about your great-grandmother as you were coming of age, what were the things that surprised you the most about her?
About her?
Yeah.
She was such a presence in our family that I think a lot of my relatives took her for granted in a way. I looked at her completely differently. I sort of, it's hard to say, but I said, wow, this person is really interesting. And I think there's more to her than what you think. And, more to being the family matriarch than that. I mean, I sort of took the approach of an outsider looking in. And that's why I'm so curious about her and how this all happened. How she created this great literary career and how she created this great family, how she was instrumental behind the publishing company, how all that happened. I had a great curiosity about it, which I don't think members of my family really have. They sort of say, okay, she was our great grandmother, fine. And she did wonderful things and she's well known. But I was sort of the anthropologist looking at the whole thing and trying to suss her out and figure out who actually she was. And that's something that, I'll keep doing for a long time. And that's kind of the way I view it. That's the way I approach her. So you're always discovering new things about her. It's really fascinating.
Randy Gray, did I see you raising your hand there in Great Falls?
Doug, you did. Just a quick comment and then a suggestion. The quick comment is this. Think of 100 years ago, the piece, after witnessing firsthand as the journalist observing World War I and the horrific events there, and then finding peace in the world's first international peace park, which all of us on this conversation do every time we go to Glacier. It's a continuing story. That's my comment. My suggestion is the Glacier Conservancy should have the ability to designate honorary citizens of Glacier. And if that's the case, I'm nominating Rick to be that. And I think the time should be at least one night in Bullhead Lodge. That's my.
Thank you for that.
I like that suggestion. And, you know, Randy's still, as far as I'm concerned, the mayor of Great Falls. So I guess we can designate anything we want. So Rick, speaking of that, you know, we would love you to come back to Glacier. You're now part of the family. All of our guests are considered part of the family. You have your choice of many places to stay with a crowd that was one of our larger book club crowds. You have been to Glacier, you experienced Glacier, but it's been more recently perhaps than your great grandmother.
Oh yeah, it was 2003 was the last time I was up there, and we'd love to get back, but we moved from the West to New England in 2015, but we do hope to get back.
And you had been a Humanities Colorado Scholar, and as we've noted earlier, a published author yourself, and we really appreciate your taking the time to say yes to a complete stranger who emails you in the dark of night to share your great-grandmother's story. We're pleased to be part of that coalition of people who go to PLA every year, Public Land Alliance every year, because as you know, Rick, and as many people probably know in this group, we run the bookstores on behalf of the park in the visitor centers. And every single book that we sell in the visitor center and in the country, in a visitor center in the country, needs to be approved by that national park. So PLA is a great place for us to be able to go because you can get mass approvals and pick up a lot of different books. And so we really appreciate, like you, it's a great opportunity for us to be able to tell these stories. And for us, this is a book that has taken on a new life thanks to this group. It's one of our best-selling books of the year. So far, we've sold over 70 copies of it. I'm sure that we will quickly sell a bunch of copies of Tenting Tonight. And it's neat to be able to keep the Mary Roberts Rinehart story alive, and now to have a face of a real person to put with it. It's really been important for me, and I think I speak for the rest of us, to have had you share this evening with us, Rick. So thank you very much.
No, it's my pleasure. And by the way, the PLA conference to which you refer, in its previous iterations, I've been at every single one since I think 1980. So I'll see you in St. Louis, hopefully.
Yeah, there we go. We'll be able to get back together again. So
yeah, that's right. Hopefully we'll be able to, see each other.
I know, that's great. So again, email info at glacier.org if you would like a book plate from Rick. And thanks for another wonderful book club. We'll be back at it again next month with the Mount Cleveland 5 Great Adventure Story, real life adventure story. Terry Kennedy of Livingston, Montana will be with us. He was all along on that journey and wrote about it, the death-defying journey. So of the Mount Cleveland 5. So Rick Rinehart, thanks again. Thanks to the intrepid group of Glacier book clubbers, and we'll see you next month. Thanks again.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rick.